What's going on, everybody? John Reyes with John and Jess Coaching, and I'm here with another video today to talk to you guys about what is the first thing you should be focused on as a beginner photographer. And it's going to be my 3 top tips on what you should do moving forward, getting off the ground and getting that camera out of the closet, shaking the dust off it, and starting to shoot. My first 3 tips are going to be, number 1 is going to be to learn what this dial is on the top of the camera, okay? It has different settings, and which ones should you mess with, which ones should you be concerned about, which ones should you just not even worry about, okay? So the first mode I would start looking at would be P mode, and that stands for program mode. Now, program mode basically just means automatic. It means that the camera thinks about everything. It thinks about all the settings, it dials it all in for you. It dials in the aperture, the ISO, and the shutter. I could hand you a camera in P mode, and you could basically just start shooting. And now those pictures wouldn't look too great. They wouldn't be dynamic. They wouldn't have maybe all the depth of field, or you wouldn't be able to get a blurred out background, but you would still get some good shots. I switch into P mode periodically, especially when I'm trying to get candids. And if the light changes too quick and I'm indoors at a church, and then I step outside and I want to grab candids of people crying or hugging, I'll switch it into P mode a lot of times just to grab those candids, okay? Because I'd rather get a good clean shot than worry about where my aperture was, where my ISO was, and things like that. The next mode would be S, okay? Now that stands for shutter speed. Shutter is how fast this little eye, it opens and closes. It's really just like an eye, okay? So, you know when your eye blinks, when you hit this shutter button, that's basically the eye of the camera blinking, okay, and how fast does it open and close. So there's different settings for that to turn it up or turn it down. Now that's called shutter. So shutter is how fast this camera snaps the shot. Basically, how fast does the eye of the camera blink? How fast does it open and shut? That's the shutter speed, okay? And that stands for S. Okay, and the next mode is gonna be A. A stands for aperture. Now aperture, once again with the analogy of the eye, opening and closing, you got shutter, which is how fast that camera snaps, how fast does that eye open and close. The aperture is similar to an iris. Now, just like our eyeball has an iris, which opens and closes depending on when we walk into a dark room or walk into bright sunlight, your eyeball opens and closes to let light in and out. This does the same thing. The iris of the lens opens and closes. That's called aperture. Now you want to change this setting depending on the type of shot you want. A wide open aperture, say at 1.2, is going to be wide open like that. Now what does this do? It lets more light in. It lets more light into the camera that hits the sensor. Now say you close that aperture and you shoot at say f16, you're closing that iris down. What happens when you close it down? Less light is coming in. So it affects the type of shot. There's different reasons why you do these settings, and that's a whole nother video. But I just want to get you used to what they mean, okay? So aperture, A stands for aperture, and that's basically the iris of the lens opening and closing. The iris of the lens opening and closing. Next we have M. That's my favorite. M stands for my favorite, okay? So M, you guys, is manual mode, okay? So on manual mode, basically you are picking the aperture, the shutter, and the ISO, okay? Now ISO, that is not on this dial here, but ISO, there's a button here that says ISO, and there's a button on, every camera has a different button for ISO, so you'll have to look on the back of your camera. But the ISO basically controls artificial light. So ISO is basically artificial light, and it makes the camera more sensitive to light. So basically you can up your ISO and you can walk into a dim room and you can create fake light, computer generated fake light, which basically helps you without having to put a flash on or having to use an external light like a LED or something like that. I think I basically covered everything on the top of the dial that you will need to get started as a beginner, okay? So none of this is going to make sense right now to you, but that's all the basics of what these dials are. That's the first place I would start as a beginner. Learn the camera dials and what they do. At least learn what they do, and then you can start practicing in different situations, and then you'll figure out, okay, I need to slow my shutter down. Okay, I need to get my shutter to go faster. Okay, I need to open the iris of the lens, need to let more light in, or I need to shut it down so I could take a sharper group photo, things like that. Like I said, none of this is gonna make sense right now, but it will once you get going. Next up is gonna be the exposure triangle, you guys. Exposure triangle, okay, it's a triangle. At the top of the exposure, now you could move these around as you want, but I would say at the top, let's put in shutter speed. Shutter speed at the top. This corner here, let's put in aperture. This corner here, let's put in ISO. These make up exposure triangle, okay? Now, all these three things are gonna affect how your picture looks, what type of picture you're gonna take, different scenarios where, say you're shooting indoors at a wedding, say you're shooting outdoors at a soccer game, you're gonna use this exposure triangle for all these different aspects in order to figure out how can I get the best shot in the situation, okay? How can I be artistic? How can I express my vision the way I want to express it through this shot? You're gonna have to go and learn the exposure triangle in order to do that, you guys. And the third thing, you guys, is gonna be composition, okay? Now, on composition, as a beginner, I would just start you off really simple. I would start you off with learning how to shoot within a frame. It's called a frame within a frame. So here in Lodi, say you go down to the arch, the famous arch downtown Lodi with the gold bear on top. We've done shots like this. We had a bride and groom, we waited till all the cars drove by and we ran out there in the middle of the street real quick and we stepped way back and we shot them kissing under this arch. That's a frame. Now look for situations outside, indoors, wherever, to create a frame to put your couple in, okay? So that's one aspect of composition. Another one is leading lines. Now in photography, creating depth goes a long ways, okay? So a leading line, say a stairway or a crosswalk, where you're just creating like leading lines that are leading up to your subject, that's a beautiful composition. Now remember, in photography, you want the people looking at the photo to know what they're looking at. So when you have a frame or you have a leading line, it's actually bringing that focus in on the subject, and that's what you want. That's what creates beautiful shots, especially in portrait photography. And one of the most popular aspects of composition is gonna be the rule of thirds, okay? The rule of thirds, basically you place your subject within these invisible lines. I'll put down a few examples right here of some photos taken that use the rule of thirds, and basically it also allows a lot of times for negative space, which negative space is just, have you ever walked into a house that was more minimalist? Maybe the colors were more white and clean and airy, and you just felt like, wow, I just want to stay in this house. I just feel so comfortable. I feel so peaceful. Now, when you get negative space in a photo, and you're using rule of thirds, a lot of times that can cause people to have that vibe, have that feeling, especially on a beach. Say you take a shot of the subject and you put them in one of the thirds, and then you leave a wide open space of the beach and maybe a sunset, maybe some mountains, then that's utilizing the rule of thirds. So I would focus in on the rule of thirds. It doesn't have to just be negative space on the rule of thirds. You can use it on anything. But it does, basically what the rule of thirds does, it just kind of just hones the viewer in on that subject, and it also gives a nice, kind of tells a nice story as well. So that's rule of thirds. So those are the three aspects of photography I would start you on as a beginner. So you're going to be able to spend hundreds of hours just focusing on those three things. You can go a long ways, weeks of just practicing those things, honing in on those skills, and next thing you know, you'll be snapping like a pro. All right, you guys, till the next one, keep snapping.